Welcome back for our first post-election session. We'll get to know what that was like in your newsrooms, I'm sure. And we're quickly learning what the new Trump administration will look like. And it's setting off alarm bells around this Capitol, capitals across the country, and within his own party. Gabbard, Gates, Hegseth, Noem. It's every announcement is like reading a new dispatch from the Onion at times. But we're so fortunate to have three guests with us today to help sort through this new reality, if you want to call it that, and also to help you prepare to report on this unusual administration. I don't know, show of hands, how many people were covering the first Trump term? A few, okay. So you all have some idea what you're in for. First, Mike Allen, a familiar face to you all. He's co-founder of Axios. In his previous life, Mike was co-founder of Politico, where he created Politico Playbook and helped build the company for its first decade. He is an alum of Time, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Jeff Mason is Reuters White House correspondent, where he has covered the presidencies of Obama, Trump, and Joe Biden, as well as the campaigns of those men, and as well as Hillary Clinton and John McCain. Jeff also has gone, as you've probably seen, toe-to-toe with Trump at many high-profile news conferences during that first term. He served as president of the White House Correspondents Association, leading the press corps and advocating for press freedom in the early days of the Trump administration. On top of all that, he teaches political journalism at Georgetown. David Weigel is a return guest for us. He is a founding reporter at Semaphore, where he writes the Americana newsletter and covered the 2024 campaign. He has been on the trail since 2006 and covered elections, Congress, and politics for the Post, Bloomberg, Slate, and Reason. He's also written for Rolling Stone, the American Prospect, the American Conservative, and the Washington City Paper. In 2017, he published The Show That Never Ends, a history of progressive rock music.
That's what this panel's about, right?
Pardon?
Yeah. Thank you.
Pardon?
Making sure that's what this panel's about. That's the only thing I prep for.
Let's switch to that.
So if you have music questions,
Yeah.
fire away.
Makes a great gift, by the way.
Thank you.
But I thought we would
So does
start
Mark
today with Jeff, just because he has had that experience of going toe-to-toe. Not that these gentlemen haven't, but gone toe-to-toe with Trump during that first term, what that was like. And I've also asked them to talk a little bit about, how to prepare for covering this term and what it means for you in balancing your work and your life. So I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Sure. Well, we all look forward to talking about work-life balance and what not to do. But I'll kick off with just what it's like to cover Trump. I think the way I am going into this second term after this election is sort of multifaceted. Number one, I feel like it's really, really important for journalists to go in and listen, because there is a perception, certainly among some on the right, that reporters got it wrong again. I disagree with that. I think there's some real reason to say that in 2016, because there was such a surprise when he won in 2016. I don't think anyone is surprised that President Trump won in 2024, and I reject the criticism from some people on the right who suggest that the press got that wrong. But I do think it's our job to listen, and that there's that is the right attitude going into Trump 2. Not only with people on the ground around the country, which is important, but also in our niche beats, those of us who are going to be at the White House or covering agencies or covering Washington in general, to listen to their perspective. I had an interesting conversation with someone recently on the right who we were in sort of a mixed group, and one person was, I would say, a Democrat, and the other was a Trump supporter. And the Democrat was pressing the Trump supporter about mass deportations and what she called the inhumanity of it. And the Republican replied by saying, I think you underestimate how many people in this country want mass deportations. And that was probably, that was an eye-opener for me, even though it shouldn't have been. I mean, the majority of people voted for President Trump. It would track that a lot of folks want mass deportations. Although I think the polling doesn't entirely support that. But the point of that anecdote is, I think it's our job as journalists to go in and listen and have an open mind about what's coming next. To some of the issues that Kevin was referring to in terms of actual challenges of covering the man of Donald Trump, I would say, we learned a lot about his relationship and his interest in the press during his 4 years. The very beginning of his term, when, as Kevin noted, I was leading the Correspondents Association, there was a lot of fear that we would come in and he would kick us out of the press room. There was concern that we'd get kicked off of Air Force One. Those are two of my prouder accomplishments that did not happen during that period. But I don't mention that to highlight that I'm proud of it, although I am. I highlight it because we also learned, and his people, I think, learned that despite having sort of made those threats, and they did make those threats, that Donald Trump likes the fact that there's a press corps and that there's a press pool around. He likes the fact that he can say, hey, I'm having a cabinet meeting now, bring in the pool, and let's keep them here for an hour. He is a reality TV host at his core, and that is something that influences how he deals with the press. So all of that is to say, I don't think we're going to face a situation where the press is going to face the challenges that we sort of faced or thought we were facing at the very beginning of his term. That said, and then I'll wrap it up, the interactions with him will no doubt be robust, and there will be some viral moments again, I'm sure. And my advice to journalism students and to young journalists and older journalists, I shouldn't be pointing at the three of us, but let's be honest, is it is not our job in a Trump administration, in a Biden administration, in a Democrat, it doesn't matter. It's not our job to be the story. It's our job to tell the story. And he will use reporters as a foil. He does that. That's fine. It's our job then to just ask the questions, to stand up for truth, to stand up for facts, and to seek to get them. And it is not our job to go in looking for a viral moment. You may have one. I certainly had a handful, but I wasn't looking for them. And I guess I think it's important. I think it's important to just go in with that attitude. Go in. You have a job to do. I never felt more of a sense of purpose as a journalist than I did during the 4 years of Donald Trump, and I think that's a good feeling. It's also very challenging and it's very stressful, and we can get into this later. But I got a couple death threats. I'm not looking forward to that again. Those things are real and those things are terrible. But the core job is to just cover him the way you would cover any other administration, any other president, in terms of going in with an open mind, a neutral, no agenda, neutrality, and a commitment to getting the facts and the stories out.
Great. Mike?
Very wise. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to the National Press Foundation for having us. The Paul Miller program is just like a fantastic program that goes back to our early days in DC, and you should be very proud. Like, getting into this is very competitive. I was quizzing Kevin downstairs about the people who didn't make the cut, and this is an impressive group. And so you should be getting in this program was a hell of an achievement. I want to pause and recognize my colleague, Erin Doherty, who's really distinguished herself. All the people who've gone through Axios in 8 years, she really has something special. And like, one learning, I think, for all of you, like, whatever your role is in a news organization, one of the reasons that Erin has stood out and has risen very quickly is she instantly made herself indispensable. And like, whatever job you're in, whatever org you're in, that is a surefire recipe for rising and being promoted. I think my colleagues will agree. And like, when something needed to be done, if there was something, and this is a place that can be a superpower of all of you, if something comes that's not in the lane of somebody who's been there for a long time, like, jump on it. Like, that was when I was at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I loved summer, I loved nights, I loved weekends, because the real reporters were gone, and I could just plunge in. And like, that's a real opportunity for you, or finding your way, finding your coverage lane. A lot of your colleagues are going to be very set in their ways, and that's opportunity for you, because when there's something that is not in their lane, you can be indispensable. So anyway, Erin's a fantastic Axios colleague, a great rising star, and I'm excited to be here. So 3 reporting learnings from the election, and then 3 reporting learnings more broadly from the election. 1, something that will be very useful to you. Anytime something looks funny to you, seems funny to you, it is. And a parallel is like, anything that is interesting to you, or new to you, or baffling to you, is going to be new and surprising to your readers. So a A++ example of this happened with Vice President Harris's trip to the Call Your Daddy podcast. Why were there no pool pictures of her going to that podcast, right? Like, why didn't we know where it was taped or when it was taped? Why were there no pictures of her? And now we all know, right, that the campaign paid to build a fake Call Your Daddy set in a Washington hotel. I think $250,000, right? And that, and like, it's a hell of an insight into how that campaign thought. The fact that they didn't see the advantage of going to Alex Cooper, being in her setting, and that they blew that money. But for the press, so this only came out after the election, but a dogged Harris reporter could have picked that up and pulled on that thread, because like, why are there no pictures? Like, why did this come to us out of Mars? That's one thing. 2, Jake Tapper used to, at the top of his Twitter feed, I think it's gone, but he had a Orwell quote that said something to the effect of, one of the hardest things is to spot what's in front of our face, right? Something like that. And like, that's a learning from this election, is that one of your biggest jobs, whatever your beat is, whatever your area of expertise is, there's basically 2 jobs, like 2 lobes of our brain. Like, one lobe of our brain, no matter if we're covering a person, a building, a topic, is what's in front of our face, right? Like, what are they saying? What are they doing? Where are they going, right? Like, what are they posting? What's out there? And being able to digest that, synthesize that for your audience is a massive advantage. Then the other lobe of your brain is like, what's behind the scenes, right? Like, who are they talking to? This is one of the biggest ones. Who do they talk to? Like with the new Hill leaders, like one of the first stories we had our Hill team do is like, who's John Thune's posse, right? Like, because like, who are the donors? Like, who are the aides? Who are the people on K Street? And like, that is the lobe of the brain where you really earn your money, right? Like what did they talk about doing that they decided not to do? And who has inputs and who has juice? And that's the fun part of the job, right? Because you can have an advantage over your competitors because you'll figure out, oh, like these are the people they talk to. Like these are the people that they listen to. These are the people who like get first drafts of what they're up to. And like all of that is opportunity for you. But the what's in front of your face thing. So, Dave is literally one of the world's experts in this. But if I told you on paper that 2/3 to 70% of the country said that the country was going in the wrong direction, if I told you that inflation and immigration are the two biggest issues, and if I told you that incumbents around the world were losing on inflation, immigration, direction of the country, I would have looked at those facts and I would have said, like, this is not a feasible environment for an incumbent to get elected in. Now, like, you had a unique opposition in Trump, and that's why we always like played that down. But I think something that I always point out to people is that if she overcame those things, like that would be historic, right? Because you can't overcome those things, basically, right? And so what's in front of your face? And what's in front of our face is that the hurdles that Vice President Harris had were, I think, more than realized. I think we got swept up in the pageantry of the campaign, and those fundamentals, the truth is, like it was, people keep saying the fundamentals hadn't changed when they swapped out the candidate. And that really turned out to be very dispositive. And then like the third, like reporting, learning from the campaign is polls. And this is something that I learned very vividly in 2004. And like they are very useful for a couple of reasons. Like one, you can see the direction of things, you can see the trends, you can talk to the pollsters and the people who are paying for the polls and what are they doing with it, right? Like Erin knows, and she does a lot of our public opinion coverage. Like we tend not to write a story about a poll. Like we will cover a Gallup poll, a poll from one of the networks, right? That's basically it, like Pew, right? Those are basically the polls we'll write as polls. But we'll always take a poll and I'll always take a first look at a poll because there's probably a story in it, right? The story is not the poll, but something about like a state or an issue or how money's being spent. Like that can be very revealing. It's like similarly, I think younger reporters think that they get a document and they think the document is the story. Whereas that's why having somebody you can talk to really helps because it turns out the document isn't the story. And Jeff is very good at this. Like you can take that document and you can figure out something's going on and tell a story about the document. And what we saw with the Trump polls, and now I'm going to pass it to Dave, who can correct me about this, but with a more layperson's eye, and he's an authentic expert in this, you looked at the polls, and this is what I learned in 2004. I covered George W. Bush was running against John Kerry. And going into Election Day, we thought that election was tied. And it turned out that George W. Bush won pretty easily and quickly. They didn't know that night, but he gave his victory speech Wednesday morning. And you go back and you dig into it, and what you find is that yes, all the polls were in the margin of error, but in every single one, George W. Bush was slightly ahead. And it's the same thing. You go back and look at these polls. The pollsters were pretty right. Our colleague Alex Thompson tweeted the other day, if you move a couple 100,000 votes, right, in 3 states, you have a different result. It was a close election. It is a 50-50 country. It still is a coin flip nation, as I think we're going to find in 2026. But so the takeaway is any given poll can be wrong, but every poll isn't wrong.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. Thanks for saying nice things. Thanks for saying all that stuff
Oh,
up.
wait,
yeah.
one quick thing. One of the many things I love about Dave, he has a great party trick. One of my favorite
it?
party tricks in journalism, and that is he can, after any given election, midterms or every 4 years, he can tell you the one most interesting thing that happened in every single state. He's like a human
Probably.
USA Today.
Yeah. Well, in Alabama, I would say that the redistricting lawsuit that succeeded in 2023 that created the new second district.
Arkansas?
Now, Arkansas, I'd say the Democratic swing in Bentonville was I could this is really boring. I won't do it, but I do think just the being obsessed over the facts is helpful, but often it's because I want to talk to people in those states and they notice if you're just parachuting in or if you've tried to understand the state or you're trying to understand the campaign, you know something. Thank you for your everything you said was correct, and I want to hear from students. But I would say, what Jeff is saying too about how the media approach this differently. I do think we in the traditional media, which I do think had a less of a mind share than ever before. I mean, compared to what people were listening to as they commuted to work in a podcast, or compared to Newsmax, the things they were watching. If I dial the clock back, this point in 2020, I was in Georgia because the runoffs for Senate were getting going. And two things I learned very quickly there were, one, no Republican voter I talked to thought that Joe Biden would be sworn in. Not that the election was going to be contested. They just said, no, he's not going to be sworn in. There's just something's going to happen. Some deus ex machina. They're going to prove the ballots were stolen. And I reported, and the Washington Post published it. It was very clear, the Vox Populi for Republicans in Georgia was, there's no way Biden will be president. And that was a defining story for 4 years. There were people who went through those 4 years thinking he was a fake president, and it influenced everything. It influenced how Republicans built their opposition to him, assuming that it wasn't a real majority. Even the way they talk about this Trump majority now, will probably end up being 1.6, 1.8 popular vote victory, they describe as a landslide. They never describe the Biden popular vote victory as a landslide. And the other one, just asking people what they read, they had already switched off Fox News, these Republican voters, and they were watching Real American News. They were watching Newsmax. They were watching Charlie Kirk's podcast. And other stories, I don't think I wrote one of these. I think you guys wrote these. You could see the ratings for Fox News were declining. The ratings for One American News and all those were way up. And they were starting from a lower baseline. So 100,000 people becoming 1 million people is enormous. A small development for Fox. That was also a trend that ended up mattering, that people were on the right, and even people who were coming into the electorate in their 20s and didn't have connections to their local newspaper or whatever, they just were getting different inputs, and they never stopped. They never stopped getting different inputs than the ones we in this room or our readers get. They just were hearing different news. They were hearing different facts. They were hearing things that were not facts, and that was very helpful. So the whole Biden administration, which again, there's never been a period where the ex-president was in the mix and seen as I guess 1960 to 60, it was clear that Nixon was not going to run in 64 when he ran in California. Never a period where a large section of the news was about the guy who was president who'd probably run again. Just Biden never was able to clear the brush and take over the news cycle the way that a typical president does. But that was an insightful experience because I paid a lot more attention to conservative media, and it was very helpful for me. And these are repeatable things. One of them, I'm not as good at delineating things into lists as Mike is, but Jeff was getting this. You can't walk in any situation with Trump or with the modern Republican Party and be shocked. You just can't. I feel like it's like showing up in the House of Parliament in 1777 and saying but I don't get it. They're not allowed to secede. How are that's still our colony? No, it's not. The world changed. Elections changed things. The appeal to experts or to norms is not going. I'm not even saying as a political tactic because we're not doing politics. We're covering this. If the approach is, well, this is a wild thing that no one's ever heard of before, I just want to say get used to it. If you have someone like Robert F. Kennedy or whoever, if he does not make it somebody in that place, him maybe in an acting role, you just have to cover what they're doing and what are the effects of it. November 2020, Jenny Medina of the New York Times and a lot of reporters were in South Texas in 2020 saying, hey, like the Latino men really like Donald Trump. I wonder what this means. 4 years later, I'm on press calls with Latino liberal polling groups who are still in denial about this thing that I think reporters were very good at seeing and covering from the ground. So that's the first thing I'd say, just approaching this is, first thing is don't be surprised. Don't say that can't happen. Yes, it can happen. And the second is you have definitely have a very wide aperture of what media you're reading. That was very helpful for me personally. One story I think, let me bring up the most complicated and story that offends the most people is the Republicans going really hard after the idea that gender is separate from sex, that it should be protected separate from sex, the implications of that from sports to what medicine, Medicare pays for, et cetera, et cetera. I took that seriously because, one, I talked to a lot of conservative activists after the election, and they were hyper-focused on it. And two, Trump, as soon as he started campaigning in early 2023, he launched in December 2022, and then was running in 2023, was just talking about it a lot. And I was reading, and actually Axios was reporting about Democrats who felt blindsided by this. That was mind-blowing to me. What did they think Tommy Tuberville was doing when he brought up the women's sports bill as an amendment? Was it like academic purposes? No, he was intending for Republicans to run on it. And it wasn't that if I think I'd just been talking to some Republican pollsters who like talking to reporters, would they have brought this up in early 2023? Probably not. If you're just listening to Donald Trump and listening to Charlie Kirk's show, listening to I'll go back and do the litany of podcasts. But I'll add one though. Joe Rogan. If you listen to Joe Rogan's show, he has been obsessed with that issue just as a thing to talk about, as a thing for guys to BS over for 3 hours, whether it's a doctor or a politician or comedian, obsessed with that issue. So once it elevated and became something that campaigns spent $250 million attacking, I covered it as the thing they were attacking. I tried every story. I was quoting trans people who were in politics or in NGOs about it. I was talking to the candidates on both sides, but I was never shocked. I never thought, how dare they do this? There are organizations that say talking about this at all is leading to mental distress and it's platforming hate speech. And maybe I have some privilege in this, but I thought, but it's out there. If it's out there, you have to write about it. You don't do any reader or voter a favor by saying, well, there's one thing that's out of bounds that we won't cover. We won't cover some of RFK's medical beliefs because they're out of bounds, and everyone we talk to agrees. It's too icky. It was much better, and there was really good reporting on RFK where people just kind of dug in and read his stuff and explained what it was, or said he just said something, it was false, here's why it's false. The coverage that said this seems crazy and his voters are crazy, which I didn't read a lot of, that just obviously wasn't very helpful. And I think when Democrats inevitably come back, it's worth doing the same thing. What media are they listening to? What opinions are being voiced by them that maybe are alien to the part of the country that doesn't vote for them? That's the main advice, which sounds very homeworky, but it really, and I've had a couple of interviews this week, I'm the guest of the interview, where I'm mentioning stuff they should read, and it's not shocking to them, but I have a lot of, who is Patrick Bet-David? Like, who is Blake Neff, the co-host of Charlie Kirk's podcast? And I will say, if you want a shortcut, go to JD Vance's Twitter follows and see who he follows. There are a lot of people on the right who have a lot of influence, who are seen as very extreme, but when you win an election, you might still be extreme, but you have the ability to shape power and to shape opinion, and you shouldn't be surprised by it. You have to just change what you're reading. Again, I keep complimenting the media. I just generally think we as an industry, we're pretty good at this. The exception, I would say, and no one in this room, is just the occasional TV panel I would turn on, and the premise is, how can they get away with this? Or how can they say something so offensive? I think that's not helpful to anybody, that premise. If it shuts down your investigation of what they're saying. The thing to do is say, they're saying this, the conclusion might be what they're saying is completely false. That happens a lot. That happened with the 2020 stuff I was talking about. My conclusion from Georgia was not Republican voters are onto something and the election was stolen. My conclusion was they believe something that's false that Trump is pushing, but you needed to become a bit of an expert in Georgia election law, like my colleague Amy Gardner did. She's the one who got the tape of Brad Raffensperger talking to Trump, or Trump talking to, more importantly, Trump talking to Raffensperger and asking him to win the election. If she had the attitude, this is crazy, and let's talk about something real, she wouldn't have gotten that story. So there's like a billion examples of how to do this right, and they start with, don't say something is crazy, and therefore it's not going to matter.
All right, good spot to jump in with questions. Who's up?
Hey guys, Mike Masoli with the AP. Thank you for being here. I'm listening to everything you're saying, and there's two things going through my mind. And the first one is, we've been here in 2016, we've been here in 2020, and we're here in 2024. What lessons have you learned about what the media is walking into with the distrust that this administration is going to push on the image of the media, the mainstream boogeyman monster that's in the room with all of us all the time, right? So as media, how do we combat that coming from an administration, but also the American people who seem to be on the fence with a lot of the media too? So what advice do you have for us? What lessons have you learned about us walking into this, which we're gonna have to be aware of probably for the next 4 years every single day?
I'll start. Do good work. And it's as simple as that. And I remember saying it repeatedly in 2017, that our job is to just filter through the noise and do good work. And that means telling the stories, getting the truth out, standing up for the rights of the press when needed, but otherwise not drawing attention to ourselves, just doing the work. I think that's the best way to win back trust in the press. There are forces out there that we can't fix in terms of misinformation, in terms of the foil aspect that I was using before, that I referenced before, and certainly the fact that the country is divided as acutely as it is has to in part be because of the media sources that people are getting. And I appear on all of the networks, and when I go on Fox, it's fascinating to me how Fox likes to use the media as a foil as well. I was on Fox News Sunday last Sunday, and Howard Kurtz was on, and he said he said that the media had this was the 2024 election results was the biggest mistake of the media ever. And I thought, and I didn't have a chance to respond to him on the air, but I thought, really? Like 2024 and 2016, I think, are not comparable at all. And B, I said to him, when you make broad brush statements like that, you are telling your viewers, you are looping the media and making that apply to everyone from the White House press corps to the panelists on The View, which was one of the clips that they had used before Howie's segment. I think we have to push back on that too, but I think the best thing we can do is just do good work. And I love that you mentioned Amy, Amy Gardner. That was an amazing story, and it was shoe leather reporting. And so I think where we are now, where we were in 2016, 2020, 2024, 2028, going forward, the most important thing is we just, these are our principles, and this is what we do.
Didn't you love how Jeff briefly shifted into his roundtable voice? Like you heard, so good. Very smart advice, Mike. I have something super specific, and that is, so Axios thinks of its journalism in three ways. First, trustworthy, efficient, we don't waste your time, and distinctive. Like we try to be different than anything else that's out there, give you a different insight, give you a different way of approaching the news. And the trustworthy part in the Trump era is the hardest, and here is why. Something that has completely changed, not just in the time we've been doing this, in the time that Axios has been alive. Something that has completely changed is people want us to be wrong. They want you to post something wrong so they can duck on it. People will feed you something they know is not true. That is completely new. We never had that. In the past, it was because they were idiots, or they didn't know, or we were idiots, or whatever. And so, you can't be too careful, Mike. And one of the questions, a reporting superpower question that works on any beat, anytime someone is feeding you something, a game-changing question to ask them is, how do you know that? Because the how do you know that question like unpacks like how really convicted they are of it, like what backup they have. And these guys will tell you, Jeff lives with this every single day. Like one of the most dangerous things is someone confirming something that's not true. Yes. And a lot of times they believe it's true. That's the danger. It's not like sometimes you get someone wants to seem, but it's in the know. More common, they've been caught up in. The most dangerous thing is someone confirming something they heard from another reporter. Because other reporters are idiots and they pollute the minds of our sources, right? Yeah. And so how do you know that? And so in the Trump era, just adding an extra layer of skepticism, knowing that people are going to try to weaponize your stat, your insight, your quote, your bite.
Yeah. I agree with that. I'm optimistic because the Elon takeover of X has led to this proliferation of these accounts that do just make stuff up, but they want to get it in the mix. And I think that's been extra paprika in like the recipe that I've heard repeated back to, or I guess I'd say asked back to me. I'll sometimes see a rumor online that I know is false by an account that's trying to get engagement. This has been a terrible change to that website where you can just get engagement if you get more clicks, even if it's false. And I've had somebody ask me if this thing is true. Hey, this thing that this Jason Miller did some of this the Trump campaign. He was spreading this rumor after her CNN interview with Dana Bash, her and Tim Walz, that it was 18 minutes and she'd walked out of the interview. And I saw that from accounts that are just sort of anonymous and spreading fake stuff. And I had not the Trump campaign ask me, but I had some conservatives I talked to say, "Is this true? Are you hearing this?" And like, no. And also, this is very disrespectful to Dana Bash that you would just do that and leave it out of the segment. But they were trying to. There's a version of a bad story that would quote sources that are lying to you. I agree with that completely, and I do think that's an advantage for reporting because while not trying to be patronizing to readers, you do find that just people who have media flowing across their screen don't always know the distinction of what is true and what is not. They do not know an anonymous account might publish something that you could get sued for libel if you read it in a newspaper for. I think it is an advantage for our industry that we really want stuff that can be that is backed up, even stuff that's true, and then there'll be a vexatious lawsuit by the Trump people. But I feel like it's a good opportunity to gain credibility back because there's so much bunk flying out there that's very pleasing to people. And if we can distinguish, well, you actually can't trust that flow of information. You can trust this because it's vetted and the sources are named and it held up a week later. I mean, that's the one thing that makes me optimistic right now.
Specifically, Mike, just now, is to be careful. And be sure you've got your facts right. Be sure that you trust your sources. I have an example where I made a mistake. I think Kayla may have been with me at the week or the couple days after the President Trump, then candidate Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. We were standing on the tarmac for a quick gaggle with Vice President Harris. And on my team call that morning, they had mentioned this comment about what the comedian had said. But on our team call, it was portrayed as Trump saying it. And I didn't go back and check that. And I asked her in my question, I didn't write it, I didn't tweet it, but I asked her for a reaction to what Trump had said. And boy, did the right and the Trump campaign rain down on me.
What did she say?
Well, the point of the question was just to get a reaction to what was said at the rally, and I don't think they liked the fact that I asked it. Period. And
But did she say Trump didn't say that?
No, she didn't. But anyway, my point in sharing that example of something where I got it wrong, I mean, when I heard from some Trump people, I responded to them and said, I should have asked that question differently. And it's a reminder to me, and one that I would share with all of you, whether it's in how you ask a question or even worse or more importantly in your writing, just make sure you get it right, because if you don't, in a heightened atmosphere like this will be for the next 4 years, they will use it against you.
And excuse me, just a very actionable pointer embedded in what Jeff just said is, when you do make a mistake, you get a ton of credit by saying, I made a mistake. Aaron reads the group distro of our responses to readers, and like I will very often say, that is a good point, or I hear you, or you made a good point, or we're going to fix that, or we have fixed that. And just saying that clearly, it so diffuses, because our instinct is to be defensive. And if you just say, you're right, or just say, I'll look into that, a ton of credit.
This is, I guess, along the same lines of making sure you get it right. I was an anchor in the Midwest back in the last Trump era. And I don't know if you guys remember, but he administered these must reads, things that anchors had to read on air. At least Sinclair subscribed to that. So if he moves forward and does that again, what advice do you have for journalists to stay balanced?
Explain what you mean by he administered these must reads.
So there were things that you had to read as an anchor. His administration would put it out. And if you worked for Sinclair, as an example, as an anchor, you had to read those things regardless of what it was. So if he moves forward and does that again, what advice do you have for journalists to stay balanced?
Two things. One, I remember at the beginning of Trump's first term, I go to a church in DC, and one of the people at my church who was not a Trump supporter said to me, I hope you guys in the media don't give him a platform. And I said to her, he's the president. We have to cover what he says. I think there's some legitimate criticism that can be and has been directed at the media for how Trump was covered as a candidate in 2015. I recall, the live coverage of his plane flying into DC when he was going to Trump Hotel to unveil that he actually now believed Barack Obama had been born in the United States, which he gave 2 seconds of time to after then focusing on his new hotel. I think there's reason to criticize how the media did that. But I don't think it's our job now to not cover the president. That's a long way of getting to your point. I think whether it's, and you have that's a particularly tricky issue because of Sinclair, it sounds like. But I do think it's our job to report what he says and then stay balanced with the counter view, with a Democratic view, with a reality check about what this is going to mean. And that can apply to so many policy issues now. When we're talking about, I brought up mass deportations earlier, we're going to have to report about the practicalities of that, in addition to the humanity of it, in addition to the impact it's going to have on the economy. When Trump says, I'm going to end the Ukraine war in one day, if that's your reader, if that's your intro, hopefully you have enough freedom to also say, Trump's critics say that's impossible. You have to build the balance in.
Hi, Philip Jackson, HuffPost. I was interested to hear you all's thoughts, basically about some reporters and even some companies like The Guardian moving away from platforms like X. I wanted to know, do you all think that's just kind of it won't matter, or will that actually impact how newsrooms and journalists go about disseminating stories, how people get their coverage, what outlets and platforms that they look at?
What's your own view of that?
I'm a little indifferent about it, I guess. I think X, I don't know what will happen down the line, but I think X will kind of be always somewhat accessible for people to read, just because it's just become this general level that, people are always familiar with Twitter and then what it's developed to now. I think people will stay there, but it's just for the reporters, I think, who, they write certain types of stories. I know one person was Gene Demby. He's covered policing and stuff like that. He's not on X. Joy Reid left. other platforms like that. So I mean, I'm indifferent about it personally, but I just, I'm just paying attention to trends and just kind of curious about it.
I think that part of the answer to your question is that we still don't know. And I can say anecdotally that just within the last week to 10 days, I've lost about 7,000 followers. And I don't think that's all just a clean out of bots, which happens once in a while on X. I do think people are leaving. I don't think I think journalists' job is to go to all of the places where the news is happening. So I don't see a reason for reporters to leave X. I won't, because it is still a town square in many ways online. But it's important to realize that town square has shifted and is being used in a much more targeted way by the right because of Elon Musk's ownership, and you have to take that into account. But I think to your specific question, like I don't think the answer is for journalists or journalism to leave the platform. But I do think it's too early to say whether that's a trend or what the impact of that will be.
Yeah, I have a couple. Yeah, for journalists, I completely agree. Right now, it is a social. Yeah, well, let's say what it is. It is a large social media network, the largest in the world, owned by the wealthiest man in the world, who is an advisor in the incoming administration and will benefit from various things. Literally benefit when he tweets about certain cryptocurrency that he makes money off it. That's a tricky thing to handle journalistically, but I don't think a reporter can actually leave it. The same reason I don't think a reporter can say, I don't think Joe Rogan should exist, I'm not platforming it. It is because there is so much conversation there, you have to be aware of what's going on. And as a reporting tool, it's still useful. I've been on it for so long, since 2008. I will pretty frequently find I'm trying to reach somebody for a comment or an interview, and I can't find an easy contact. This happens. There's NGOs that there's no way to contact them. You have to pull their tax forms. It still doesn't say who you should reach. But I realize somebody there follows me on that. I'll say, hey, who should I actually talk to? Who runs this account? And it helps. So that very, very basic level, I think it's still useful. But as something to engage in, and this is something I've made mistakes about in the past, I think I haven't made recently. Someone can correct me. I think of how the right treats X, beyond Elon owning it. It is a place to get material to make fun of liberals. Liberals in a lot of their view include the media. So Joy Reid quitting, probably a good idea for Joy Reid, because what was Joy Reid's content on X going to do? Was it going to drive more viewers to her show? Maybe. Was it going to have her liking a tweet by somebody that would then become a story on Fox News? Much more likely. And so for people who want, if you're a journalist who's not an opinion journalist and wants to get in that mix every day, then you have to be very careful. But you should have been careful before on how you handle it. Just be aware that the way the Trump campaign, Final handled X with rapid response, and the Harris campaign was doing some of this. The Trump campaign was doing it too. Was getting videos into the bloodstream of, here is a 5-second clip of Kamala Harris saying something that sounds crazy, and sometimes, not every time, if you found the 20-second clip, it was not crazy, it was not out of context. Here's word salad, actually here's the whole answer. That's another thing to be very careful of as a journalist, is there are partisan actors on X. This will probably include this White House, comms people, based on who is working for it, who will just be trying to feed a storyline. And if you're in a newsroom writing a story, you just have to do more than see the tweet. And everyone here's really smart. I don't think they'll make that mistake. But just we know how brains work to a certain degree, and there's stuff all the time that is trending and trending. It's a huge story. It's much bigger than the story you're working on. All right, I need to reverse engineer this for 5 minutes and see where this came from and see where the video came from. Sometimes stories come from that. Sometimes I've gotten stories where something has been blowing up, and I explain what's been happening, and it gets that. Is it the highest value story in the universe? Perhaps not. But it comes from knowing that for a lot of people, they are not gonna. Their interaction with the New York Times, for example, might be people screenshotting headlines from the New York Times and not anything else, with not a link to it, not content from the story, not who wrote it, just a headline without context. And you just, I have to stop my answer because this is like a 5-hour model course on how to not do this. But the information climate a lot of people are getting for free is kind of messed up, and you provide a lot of value from knowing how to use it, but not getting sucked in and just being part of it.
Hey, I'm Jacob. I'm a White House reporter with Scripps News. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah.
My question is less about sort of covering the incoming administration as much as it is existing as a journalist in the current sort of media economy. There are a couple of us in this room who have faced layoffs, myself included, this past year. You know, the media is contracting. We are being asked to do more with less resources, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the challenges that I've faced as a result of that is thinking about building a personal brand versus like loyalty to the outlet that I'm working for currently, given that it, you know, maybe that outlet doesn't exist very much longer. And so I'm curious how you all approach that, thinking about, you know, the challenges of wanting to contribute to a team, wanting to share sourcing with your colleagues, but also recognizing that, like, if you're thinking about future jobs, maybe it is a good idea to tweet out your little scooplet first before you write it up, because hiring managers might be looking at those sorts of things in the future. So just thinking a little bit about personal branding versus, you know, journalistic collaboration with your colleagues and how you approach that.
I could take that. I just answered the last one, but I could take that because that comes up all the time. I would say generally never, if you're working with a news organization, never tweet something without telling people in the room. There are, the exception might be you were at an event and something is being said and you, from your experience, know that is a newsy thing, and you might, if an editor's not on Slack at that moment or on the phone, you might want to, here is the factual thing that was said at the rally that is new and interesting. This happened a lot it happens all the time covering stuff like, oh, this is a new line from, one pretty modest example, new line from Tim Walz. I was at a rally in Madison and he started going after Elon Musk and I just quoted what he said and I didn't tell my editor. It wasn't a scoop. For an actual scoop, for something that you should have, I would say generally, yeah, always keep people in the loop for it. But the material you're talking about is news. Like if you are a person who is making news and getting interesting news and sharing things, then that will help. And the fact that people know it's you who did it, that will help too. I did one yesterday where I was talking, when the Kennedy nomination came down, I was talking to a pro-life leader, and I just threw in a Kennedy question and she was unhappy. And so I said on Slack, hey, I'm finishing this interview and she has this Kennedy quote, I'll add it to your story. Do you mind if I also tweet this separately? And I tweeted it separately. And I think that worked out for everybody. But I was answering your question first because it ties in the last one. Do not do the brand of just quote tweet of something Trump said. This is bad. This is really offensive to me. Like that seems obvious to everybody, but there are people who definitely got brands from that, and I don't think they're very good and sustainable brands. And I definitely had a version of that years ago that I think was really bad, and I spent some time to unbuild. I did do a ton of dunking, but even I would do dunking on this poll sounds crazy or something, and people will remember you said that poll sounds crazy and you were wrong. So yeah, just being judicious and not being hot-headed. Like again, pretty basic stuff, but I think that everyone here.
I can give you extremely specific advice about this, and this is a room of very talented journalists. You're all on the rise. You all have enviable jobs. You're all covering an enviable time and place. Don't waste your time tweeting bullshit. More people waste more time thinking they're building their brand. You do not build your brand by retweeting Maggie Haberman, right? If Maggie Haberman has said something, she doesn't need me to retweet it or anyone else, right?
Well, or quote tweeted, put some googly eyes on top of it.
The little carrot marks, or you're not going to, this is the way to think about it. You're not going to get your next job based on the scooplet that you tweeted on Twitter. That is not what the employer of the place that you wants to work is going to be looking for, right? They're going to be looking for your thinking, your body of work, the smart questions that you ask, your insights, your instincts, and those can be reflected in tweets. And as you're on the rise, having people see your name, build your brand is valuable. But it's going to be for all those things, not some in the moment, either thought bubble or it's a scooplet that, like, who cares? Like, one of my things about a scoop is a scoop should be something that others will wish they'd had or will follow and credit you, or that you're proud of, or that makes a difference in the conversation, right? Like after that, it is, it's not going to be what's going to move the needle for you. Like your most precious commodity is your time, right? Like, what can you produce in the time you have and with the platform you have that's going to cause newsmakers to interact with you, or the next employer to spot with you? And it's not dumb tweets.
Just one line to that, which is, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, what you're asking about. I think you can boost your personal brand by doing good work. I'm going to sound like a broken record now, but just like get scoops, get good stories, write them for the employer.
Insightful, be in the right place at the right time, like all that is what.
And do them for the employer that you're working for, and it'll still get noticed. And don't worry about, should I tweet this verse? Like, just do the work.
Did you have a question? Okay. Ashanti, Great Television again. Okay, so after I'm done with my live work, I do correspondent work for over 100 different stations. A big part of my job is getting lawmakers from my markets to talk about what's going on, whether it's on the Hill or in the White House. And I'm noticing already a huge shift with the amount of people that are willing to talk. So do you have, and I obviously think that that's because we're coming into a Trump era. So do you have any advice for us journalists on how to approach members of Congress that maybe have cold feet?
That's super interesting. What is the shift? Like, where do you notice it?
Well, they're just not willing to talk as much. I mean, I've established relationships with some of these
this
staffers.
Is post-election, or?
Yeah, well, yeah. Say again.
Both parties?
Both parties.
Oh.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's because they're waiting for Senate confirmations. But I've just noticed I'm not really getting as many hits back when it comes to interviewing.
Yeah, I bet that'll change.
Say again.
I bet that'll change.
Okay, so just be patient.
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into that. And you know, I may be wrong, but my guess is that there will be a very robust resistance by Democrats once Trump is in office, and that they'll want to talk about it. And the Republicans may be more careful because they won't want to cross the president, but they also may, you know, be eager to go out and talk about what they feel he's accomplishing. This is just, the transitions are hard. It's hard to get people to talk during the transitions. I wouldn't read too much into that.
Okay.
And just one thing to add, and I'm sure that you do this, but just to reinforce this instinct, like the idea of all politics is local, right? Like if Trump said thing, what do you say, right? They may pass on that, but if the pitch is, what should people in X market know about Washington today? Like, I'm going to jump at that. And so I would just always frame it through their lens, through their eyes. It's like our thing of audience first. Your audience is the booker or the aide to the congressperson. What are they thinking about? And like, what are they most likely to bite on? Just do it through their eyes and your rate will go up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, guys.
Erin's going to tell us some stories about her boss.
Yeah, exactly.
And excuse me, this is probably the last questions. Because
We're going to do one more.
One more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll let you run.
Thank you for being here. We've talked about sort of going into the Trump administration, like the fundamentals of being a good journalist don't change, and to like continue to do work and not be surprised by sort of the things that could happen. But I'm curious, sort of as you guys look ahead to January, like, are there tangible things that you think about that you will cover this administration differently than when you covered his first term? Like, are there ways that you are approaching this time that are different than in 2016 and during his first term, besides like, you know, focus on the facts, focus on not making mistakes? But I'm curious if there's like sort of anything that you're like, just in terms of your coverage, in terms of your sourcing, that are different this time around.
I think that's a terrific question, and I think the answer isn't quite clear yet.
Yeah.
Certainly at our shop, I think we're still figuring that out. We're figuring out our plan, figuring out who's going to be on the team. So I think it's too early to answer that, but I do think it's a good question to ask. I will tell you that I thought it was interesting the day that Joe Biden and Donald Trump met in the briefing room afterwards. I asked Karine whether or not the issue of Trump not having acknowledged Biden's win in 2020 had come up in their meeting. And she said, we're moving forward. And I thought that was interesting since for the last 2 years, really 4 years, they've talked about Trump as a threat to democracy, and they've had good reason to talk about January 6th and the fact that the courtesy that Biden extended to Trump on whatever day that was, Wednesday, had not been extended to Biden 4 years before. But what was interesting to me was not only the fact that they're saying they're moving on, but it made me just ask the question in my head, what's the press's role about this next? Like, we will take a lot of criticism if we keep harping on January 6th, and harping is the wrong word because that suggests that it's not a legitimate area of questioning. It is. But has the country moved on? What responsibility does the press have in terms of still holding accountability for that really large and important issue and part of our history versus he won again, guys, and the majority of the country voted for him, and this is his platform, and these are his policies that he wants to do. I think we will be wrestling with some of those things. I think it will be our responsibility to cover what he's doing and what he promises to do. And I think it's an open question about how much do we look back at the same time. I don't know what you guys have thoughts about on that.
I'm going to yield my time.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's up?
Yeah.
Thank you, Kwesi from PolitiFact. The first Trump term was full of turnover and attrition and people leaving. Now he's focused more on loyalty, it looks like. How do you think that will change how we cover him and also his administration going forward?
One, obviously, you guys know more about that directly, but it was just one thing we learned in the campaign is that there were lots of people who were talking to reporters off the record or as anonymous sources who then came out and said, "Hi, it's me. I'm Olivia," or "I'm Miles, and I worked for Trump, and he can't serve again, and they're not going to be back. It is going to be a loyalty-focused administration." I think the Project 2025 story, if I can quickly boil it down, was good reporting, Axios and Times and other people, but I'm thinking their stories first. The Post and other people at the White House, and I was covering some things, but I wasn't the one getting back channel stuff. There will be an effort to have no back channel stuff, which I don't think will be. The Biden administration wasn't doing that. This is one big topic, but one reason we had we didn't have many leaks from administration that ended up having to dump its being able to seek re-election because of the perceived incompetence of the president. That was leaking less than the Trump administration.
I just picked this up from another very talented reporter who reminded me that knowing who these people are gives you an incredible edge that I remember anytime I'd go back to a district with a member of Congress, totally new relationship and understanding with them. And if you have the opportunity to go back to a state you can ride all day in a minivan with a senator if you go back to their state, right? But thinking about, we're talking about the inputs, like who are their donors, right? Like who do they consult, right? Like who were their bosses? Like this ecosystem around the people. Anybody you cover at all, whether they head an agency or whether they're elected or whether they're appointed, like the more that you know about them and how they think, because eventually we're so predictable that you're going to be able to know what they're like Jim Vandehei, our CEO, who was a very gifted Hill reporter for Roll Call and the Journal. He said that he knew the people well enough that he knew what they were thinking or were going to do, and he would call them and say, "Can you confirm this?" And it's a spin on like really knowing what's happening, and then calling the communicator to get it confirmed. Right? They're not going to give you the story, but if you go to them with it, you're a lot more likely to get a hit.
Last one. Okay.
Aneri with KFF Health News. My question is somewhat similar to Ashanti's. A lot of my work is around, my outlet's work is health agencies and the regulations and policies and work that they do. And my colleagues and I have found like none of the like staffers in these places are super chatty to begin with, but like are less so now, or even like don't want to agree to like, you know, senior official at FDA or whatever. And I'm wondering how, if you can talk a little bit about how to get them to open up while also balancing, like, I'm not trying to burn these people. They do face a risk of being fired. There is, you know, legitimate fear. So I'm thinking about how to balance that while also not having stories that say like, so a source said, you know.
I have something super actionable on that. And that is, go to them and talk to them about something they want to talk about, right? Like when they have a study or a finding or like whatever it is that they like, they're not going to want to talk about RFK, right? But or about their big bosses. But I'm talking about doing something in a completely open book and sincere way. Like we're not trying to fool them. You're not pretending to be interested in something you're not. That is because of social media, because of the other tools, you can usually know what they're pushing or what they want to know. And there's going to be something about that that's interesting to you or your audience. And then after you talk to them about something they're interested in, then you can be sincere about like the other things that are on your mind. And the good all-purpose question, like what's everybody all stirred up about, right? Like people are always stirred up, right? So just ask them. But it's one way to develop a relationship, and the down the line that you'll have someone to call. And I would always be extremely sincere about it, because that will, your reputation on that will spread fast. But just being smart, it's the audience first idea. Like what is it that they will respond to? What are they interested in? That's a way to develop a rapport.
And get their contact information either way.
Yeah.
Because at some point they may be willing to talk.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but as you can tell...
Oh, just give me 2 seconds on that. Sure. Like always, 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 including senators, ask for their cell phone number. Mm-hmm. They often will give it to you. And just say, can you text me so we're connected, is usually what I'll say. Or can I text you real quick so we're connected? How do you do it?
Well, actually, I always double check quotes too with people before I run the story. I want to say, hey, we talked about, even in the hallway. Hey, we talked in the hallway for 40 seconds. So I make sure this is accurate. And
perfect.
That's and not as a ruse, but it really is.
Because perfect. Yeah.
One of our rules is always no surprises. Like you open the paper. It's like, I didn't say that, or who said that for my staff? Like you're always checking back. So if you have a relationship, it's like, oh, this person, because there are a lot, especially Republicans coming in who have this demonic image of the media, and then I find a lot of surprise, like, oh, you just wanted to find out why I'm writing this bill? Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
And they almost always, in addition to building trust, they almost always will give you more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good advice. I agree with that.
I like may I text you so we're connected. I sometimes would just hand them my phone and say, but that has worked sometimes, but I did this once with someone who just typed in a name and then did not type in a number. So, they're
that's funny.
That was not helpful. But just get whatever strategy it is, get the details.
And it's a good ruse too. I mean,
it can be a ruse, but I mean, it's not.
But a fabulous
win-win.
Yeah,
but, I mean, you can burn them if it's like, hey, I'm calling you at 10 p.m. for a scandal quote. Like, just treat them like you want to be treated. Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking these folks.
Thank you all. Great questions. Great conversation.